What's going on today, YouTube? Rob here. Today I'm going to be doing another deck profile for you, and this deck is my interpretation of fossils. There are some cards in here that I am considering taking out and changing for cards to make this a little bit more competitive, but again, right now this is my interpretation of a fossil deck. There are also some cards in here that you will notice later in the video that have a little bit different sleeve colors or bigger sleeves, and that is because I just took cards from other decks that I have just to fill out the space. But again, these are cards that you would run in fossils, or that I would run in fossils anyway. And before we get started, I just want to say, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for more fun content. And without wasting any more of your time, let's get into this video. Alright guys, let's get into this pure fossil deck profile. So first off, we're going to start with Quakemaro Guardian. During each of your end phases, destroy this card unless you send one Iron Core of Quakemaro from your hand to the graveyard, or reveal one rock monster in your hand. When a monster effect is activated, quick effect, you contribute this card and negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. Next we have 3 copies of Quakemaro Draco. I've considered cutting this card, as it is a dragon card and not a rock card, but his effect reads as follows. During each of your end phases, destroy this card unless you send one Iron Core of Quakemaro from your hand to the graveyard, or reveal one Dragon-type monster from your hand. Neither player can special summon light or dark monsters. Next we have 3 copies of Weathering Soldier. He is one of your main cards for this deck. He allows you, if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, or by a card effect, you can add 1 Fossil Fusion or 1 card that specifies or specifically lists Fossil Fusion in its text, except for Weathering Soldier, from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect of Weathering Soldier once per turn, and once per turn during your end phase, this card loses 600 attack. That part of the effect isn't as important as being able to recycle Fossil Fusion. And if you have Fossil Fusion already in your hand, you're really just trying to use Weathering Soldier as fusion material. Then we have 3 copies of Quakemaro Overload. So during each of your end phases, destroy this card unless you send 1 Iron Core of Quakemaro from your hand to the graveyard, or reveal reveal 1 rock monster from your hand. When your opponent would summon a monster or monsters, quick effect, you contribute this card, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. Again, this card is good for interruption, and again, should be played at 3, and it's really good for this deck. Next we have our hand traps. So we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Very typical hand trap that allows you to negate basically when a card is added from deck to hand, when a special summon happens from the deck, or when cards are sent from the deck to the graveyard, and you can only activate 1 Ash once per turn. Then we have our Adamancipator Engine. So I have 1 copy of Seeker. So this allows you, if you control an Adamancipator monster except for Seeker, you can special summon this card from your hand. During your main phase, you can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can special summon 1 excavated level 4 or lower non-tuner rock monster. Also, you place the rest of those cards at the bottom of your deck in any order, and you can only use the effect of Seeker once per turn. Then I have 1 copy of Analyzer. just as a way to be able to get cards on the field quickly. So if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. During your main phase, you can excavate the top 5 cards from your deck, and if you do, special summon one of the excavated level 4 or lower non-tuner rock monsters. Also, again, place the rest of the cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. You can only use Research or Analyzer once per turn. Then we have 2 copies of Researcher. This card is a little bit better than the other 2 because you don't have to control an Adamancipator monster. You only have to control a rock monster, and as long as it's not Researcher, you can special summon it from your hand. And during your main phase, you can excavate the top 5 cards once again, and you special summon one excavated level 4 or lower non-tuner rock monster, and place the rest of the cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. Then we have our 2 copies of the crystals. So we have 1 Crystal Raptite and 1 Crystal Dragite. Crystal Raptite lets you, if you special summon this card by the effect of Adamancipator card, you can place 1 rock monster from your hand or graveyard on top of your deck. And if this card is in your graveyard, you can target 1 Wind Synchro monster that you control or in your graveyard and return it to the extra deck. And if you do place this card on top of your deck, you can only activate Raptite once per turn. Then Dragite is basically the same effect. If this card is special summoned due to the effect of an Adamancipator card, you can draw 1 card. And if this card is in your graveyard, you can target 1 Water Synchro monster that you control, and that's in your graveyard, and return it to the extra deck. And if you do, place this card on top of your deck, and you can only use the effect of Dragite once per turn. That rounds off our monsters. And again, there are cards that I would take out, or am considering taking out, maybe running more hand traps. But this is my variant of the fossil deck, and please excuse the different card sleeves for some of these cards because I'm taking them from other decks right now. Now we're going to start off with triple copies of Specimen Inspection to start off our magic cards, or spell cards. So Specimen Inspection lets you reveal 1 Fossil Fusion in your hand and send 1 monster from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, declare a type and a level. Then your opponent looks at your hand and deck and sends 1 monster with the declared type and level from your hand and deck to the graveyard, if possible, and you can only activate 1 Specimen Inspection per turn. Then we have our bread and butter for the deck, and the namesake for this deck, Triple Fossil Fusion. So Fossil Fusion allows you to fusion summon 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your graveyard, from any graveyard except for materials with specific graveyard requirements listed. If you banished monsters from both graveyards, neither player can target that special summoned monster with monster effects. And if a face-up Fossil Fusion monster or monsters you control is destroyed by battle or by card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can add this card from your hand, from the graveyard add this card from your graveyard to your hand, and you can only use the effect of Fossil Fusion once per turn. Then we have Triple Time Stream. So this lets you target 1 Fossil Fusion monster you control, and you tribute it, and if you do, special summon 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your extra deck, whose original level is 2 higher than the monster that you tributed. This is treated as a fusion summon with Fossil Fusion. During your main phase, except the turn that this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card and 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your graveyard, then target 1 Fossil Fusion monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Next we have 2 copies of Miracle Rupture. I have considered running this at 3, but I don't have 3 copies currently, so it is at 2. But yeah, I would consider running this at 3. This lets you send 1 level 4 or lower rock monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if Fossil Fusion is in your graveyard, draw 1 card. You can only activate 1 Miracle Rupture per turn. And lastly, for our spell cards, we have triple Galaxy Cyclone. This works as your spell and trap card removal. So target 1 set spell or trap card on the field, destroy it. During your main phase, except the turn that this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 face-up spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. You can only use the effect of Galaxy Cyclone once per turn. And that's it for our spell cards. Again, there are other cards that you can run in this deck, but this is my version of this variant of this deck, and that is what I'm running. Now onto the traps. We only have 5 in total. So we have 2 copies of Rock Bombardment, which lets you send 1 rock monster from your deck to the graveyard and inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent. Then we have Intruder Alarm Yellow Alert at 3. This card, when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you special summon 1 monster from your hand, but return it at the end of the turn that it's summoned, or at the end of the battle phase. While you control that face-up special summoned monster, your opponent cannot target other monsters for attacks. You can only activate 1 Intruder Alarm Yellow Alert per turn. And that rounds off our main deck. And again, there are other trap cards that you can play in this deck, but this is my variant, and this is what I went with. Let's move on to our extra deck. So we have 3 copies of Fossil Warrior Skull King. This card requires 1 rock monster and 1 level 7 or higher monster. Must be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. This card can make a second attack during each battle phase, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. During your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, discard 1 card, and if you do, special summon that monster to your field. You can only use the effect of Fossil Warrior Skull King once per turn. Next, we have Fossil Dragon Skullgar. This card requires 1 rock monster and 1 level 4 or lower monster in your opponent's graveyard. Must first be special summoned with the effect of Fossil Fusion. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. You can banish this card from your graveyard and add 1 Fossil Fusion from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect of Fossil Dragon Skullgar once per turn. Then we have 3 copies of Fossil Dragon Skullgios. This card requires 1 rock monster and 1 level 7 or higher monster in your opponent's graveyard. This card must be special summoned again using Fossil Fusion. And before damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can switch the current attack and defense of that opponent's monster until the end of the damage step. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. If this fusion summoned card battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage it inflicts to your opponent is doubled. Then we have 3 copies of Fossil Warrior Skullbone. So this card requires 1 rock monster and 1 level 4 or lower monster. Must first be special summoned using the effect of Fossil Fusion. This card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. You can banish this card from your graveyard and add 1 time stream from your deck to your hand. You can only use the effect of Fossil Warrior Skullbone once per turn. And then lastly, for our fusions and for our Fossil Warrior cards or Fossil Dragon cards, we have 1 copy of Fossil Warrior Skull Knight. So this card requires 1 rock monster and 1 level 5 or 6 monster. Must first be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. If this card attacks the defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. And when this attacking card destroys a monster by battle, you can activate this effect. This card can make a 2nd attack in a row. And you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 monster on the field and destroy it. You can only use the effect of Fossil Warrior Skull Knight once per turn. And to round off our extra deck, we have 1 copy of Adamancipator Risen Dragite and Adamancipator Risen Raptite. This card allows you to excavate the top 5, or these cards allow you to excavate the top 5 cards from your deck, and depending on which monster you have on the field, you get the added effect of either sending cards from your opponent's side of the field back to your hand equal to the number of excavated rock-type monsters you control, or being able to special summon 1 of the excavated rock monsters that you got with this effect. And also, during your opponent's turn, if a wind monster is in your graveyard, quick effect, you can target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. And that is for Risen Raptite. And for Dragite, he has the same sort of effect where when your opponent activates a spell or trap card or effect while a water monster is in your graveyard, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. And you can only activate Dragite once per turn. Again, if I wasn't running the Adamancipator engine in this deck, I wouldn't have included the 2 synchros. I would have, if I also had the other cards, just used Fossil Warrior Skull Knight at 3. The use of Time Stream and the use of all the other fossil monsters in this deck is good to be able to special summon your higher level fossil monsters, because you can use their effects and pop off Time Stream or Fossil Fusion, or just straight up fusion summon into another higher monster that is 2 stars higher than the current one. So yeah, that basically wraps up the extra deck and wraps up all the cards that are in this deck. Alright guys, that's it for this fossil deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as I mentioned earlier and in the video, I apologize for having cards with different sleeves, but I was pulling them from other decks that I have just to be able to fill out the space. But these are the cards that I would like to run in this fossil deck. And again, yes, there are some cards that I would change, but right now I like it how it is. And if I wanted to make this a little bit more competitive, or if you wanted to make this a little bit more competitive, you can always change the aspect of cards that are in this deck. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, consider hitting a like, and if you're not already, subscribe to the channel for more fun content. And I will see you in the next one. That's game!